for the next half hour. Now, I have to say, to all of our speakers who've spoken already, forgive me if you're offended by what I'm about to say. David Green, that includes you. Because technically speaking, the next panel is all about the cool kids in the room. It's definitely the cool kids. We're going to begin our afternoon with a sponsor panel and really recognizing the incredible role of our sponsors, Google, Airbnb, Uber, Mastercard, and Investec. And we have a panel that's going to be talking about digitalization. Now, we could not have a better person for this because we have managing this process amongst everything else she's done to make this summit happen, Juanita Clark. She's the co-founder and CEO of Digital Council Africa, an NGO headquartered in South Africa. She serves on several advisory boards. She's very much influential and seen as one of the top 100 most influential women in technology. She plays a critical advocacy role. She is trusted. She is relied on. She has been invaluable in bringing us all together. She has been up through the night, but she is switched on. She is connected, and she has a fabulous panel. So with that and without any delay, Madam, the stage is yours. Enjoy.
Thank you, Anita. Colleagues, it's so great to be with you this afternoon. I know it's slightly different, hey, going from a traditional tourism conversation to also looking at the digital, or rather the impact of digitalization on the tourism sector. And I think it should be something that concerns all of us, and that all of us should understand better. We spoke about AI a little bit earlier today, raised its head. But before we jump into detail, can I ask all my panelists to come on? And while they do, can I ask you to give them a round of applause, because this event is happening because of them. Thank you. Deepesh, Wilme, Gwen, and Sipho. Grab a seat, colleagues. As Anita was saying, my name is Juanita Clark. I started an industry association 15 years ago. I was clearly 12 at the time. But it's been an incredible ride to watch the digitization of Africa. So my area of expertise is actually in fiber optics. So we just deployed some of the first fiber optic networks in South Africa. We also work a little bit across the continent. And the digitization is so critical when it comes to bringing people online. And of course, without the network infrastructures and good connectivity, we won't have a platform economy, all of which of you, play in that space. So, Deepesh, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to ask you to interview Sipho, Gwen, and Wilme, just a little bit, a minute in the life of.
Sure, thank you. I'm Deepesh Thomas. I'm the General Manager for Uber Mobility, Sub-Saharan Africa. So I look after the business across SA plus 6 markets. That's about me. We face quite a very ops-heavy business, so it's a very day-to-day kind of operation. I think globally also we're across 70 countries, 10,000 cities, and the largest mobility business in the world. So thank you for having me.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sipho Mtombeni. I manage government affairs and public policy for Google. I'm based in Johannesburg. So you might be thinking why Google is interested in the tourism sector. I mean, one thing that is quite clear is that when a lot of people, a lot of the tourism journey for a lot of people starts online. You want to go to Cape Town, you want to go to Johannesburg, you go into Google search, you start looking from there, and the journey goes there, and we'll get hopefully into a little bit more detail about that, but that's really why we were keen to be part of this engagement.
Hi everyone, Gwen Ngwenya, similar role as Sipho. I'm the Head of Government Affairs and Policy for Mastercard, part of the Mastercard EMEA team. And essentially, I mean, Mastercard is a technology company, but in the payments industry. So we see ourselves as really facilitating the exchange of value. So wherever there's value to be exchanged, that's really where we focus on. So, we see ourselves as a key enabler of the tourism industry.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wilme. I'm the Head of Public Policy for Airbnb across Africa. I think in this space, it doesn't need much explaining. We're both a verb, a noun, and adjective, and it's great to be here.
Great, thanks, guys. So, so we're talking about Uber connects travelers to more places. Google makes destination businesses discoverable. Mastercard, of course, facilitates payments, and Airbnb, expands, choice and affordability, and helping with the host economy. But I want to talk a little bit about inclusivity. We live on a continent. We have massive divides, and Wilme, I want to start with you, and I wanted to ask you, just from your data, and if you look at the data that forms part of your business, what do you see in how people are choosing to travel, particularly for this conversation in South Africa?
Well, it's clear there's a lot happening on the travel scene right now, and the ways that people are choosing to travel is rapidly evolving. I think if I was to highlight some of our key trends, 3 that really stand out for me is 1, the role of Gen Z and how they're rapidly changing how people travel. 2, the power of women in driving demand. And 3, the role of domestic tourism. So I think going back to point 1, Gen Z is our fastest growing travel cohort. They far outpace family, solo, duo travelers. And they are really changing how and where people go and how they travel. When we've surveyed them, what we have found is that Gen Z are craving meaning over mainstream. So of 60% of the people that we actually surveyed, they want to go to not yet trending destinations. They want to go off the beaten track. They want to be away from the crowds. They want to connect with locals and local stories. And so what we're finding is that they're using short-term rentals and visiting these lesser-known destinations. And then through the power of social media, because Gen Z are digital storytellers, what they're doing is they're putting these smaller destinations on the global map because they're featuring them on social media far beyond just their family and friends. So Gen Z is definitely one to watch in terms of how people are choosing to travel and where they're spreading the benefits of tourism. The second one is women. Women are not just going places, but they're driving the entire economy. So we see that women on Airbnb are the majority travel planners. They're the decision makers, which I think is fair. Yeah. And they're also the majority of travelers. And so that doesn't just pertain to travelers, it's also our host community. We see over 65% of hosts in South Africa are in fact women. So that means women are earning more, they're getting more 5-star reviews, and ultimately injecting more energy into the sector. And then lastly, the role of domestic tourism. What we've seen on Airbnb has been really exciting for us. We actually see that all the arrivals in South Africa, 67% of them are domestic. So in recent data, what we've seen is over 700,000 guest arrivals in Cape Town alone. And what this is showing is not only in terms of the impact around job creation, so of those 700,000 guest arrivals that generated over 42,000 jobs. We're seeing that there's a need to make travel accessible and affordable. We need a diversity of price points, we need a diversity of choice if we're going to sustain this growth when it comes to domestic tourism.
That's incredible. Thanks. And it's also awesome that we've now got access to this information, at our fingertips, because we can analyze the data. We better understand what tourists want, how they spend money, how they move around, and also their financial spending. Gwen, I want to ask you, what makes the difference between intent to travel and actual spending?
I think there are many drivers, but maybe 2 that I can just focus on is, one is destination attractiveness, and the other is reducing friction in the traveler experience, particularly even, pre-trip, so in terms of curating the traveler experience. So, and I, can say a bit about how we're supporting both those 2 ambitions. So on destination attractiveness, because we now partner on a number of high-profile global sporting and entertainment events, for example, the UEFA Champions League, the PGA Tour, we spoke about golf earlier, and then also Formula One. And I'm very excited about the fact that from next year onwards, we'll be a named partner as part of the McLaren team. So it'll now be the McLaren Mastercard Formula One team. So we're particularly interested in South Africa's ambitions to host the Formula One. But through this experience and all of these global sporting and entertainment events, combined with obviously the general spending data that we have and that we analyze through our Spending Pulse, our toolkit, it means that we're able to really leverage powerful tourism insights on how tourists spend domestically and internationally, and also how that spending happens, whether it's via cash or via digital channels, etc. And more importantly for destinations and from a marketing perspective, what that means is that we can really be a powerful partner in supporting data-driven destination marketing and management. So we're really excited about the work that we can do in that area in enhancing destination attractiveness. The second area that I mentioned was reducing friction in the traveler experience. Obviously, we're not a direct sort of tourism provider, but we do have, as a broader stakeholder in the ecosystem, an interest in helping to support and increase tourism numbers. And one of the ways we do that is through what we call priceless experiences. So in partnership with our partners, such as banks and other financial institutions, we're able to offer customers really these priceless experiences, either via campaigns where they can win a priceless experience through a campaign, or also more popularly through loyalty programs as well, where we can present curated experiences for customers at a discounted offering. So, you know, we're really interested in supporting both of these areas, reducing the, and I suppose in that way, how you reduce friction for the traveler is really these curated end-to-end experiences. So I think that would be the central point of our priceless experiences, is that it's not just an opportunity to experience a destination or an attraction. It's really an end-to-end experience from the flights, the travel, the attractions one visits, etc.
Thanks, Gwen. Sipho, I'm going to jump straight into you. And I want to ask you from a Google's perspective, is our tourism sector then really ready to capture demand in, you know, this increasingly digital world?
Yeah, so I think I want to twist your question around. I think how I want to say it is that the tourism sector has got no choice but to be ready for the digital economy that it's finding itself in, right? So as I mentioned, we found that the digital journey, or the tourism journey, sorry, for a person starts online. You know, you go on Google, you search for hotels, you search for flights, you look for destinations, you start moving from there. Then you start getting into digital payment systems where you have to transact on some sort of digital platform in order to be able to book your flight or book to where you're going. So I think we are at a point where we need to find a way where tourism and digital is kind of just one thing altogether. Obviously, there would be a few challenges to do so, and for us to get there quite as much as we want to, especially in South Africa and on the African continent more pronouncedly. You know, we still face challenges like connectivity, prices of data, access to devices, etc., which makes it the digital access to digital tools and devices a little bit more trickier for people on the continent. But those are, again, opportunities and challenges that we would need to address. I know there's also challenges in relation to digital skills, in terms of, for instance, when we think about our operators and SMBs in the country, and their ability to make use of the various digital tools that exist. But again, that challenge could be seen as an opportunity. How do we then work to address that? And then also then making sure, like, for instance, that they have the necessary ability to make use, like, of digital payment platforms, et cetera, et cetera. So to answer your question, I think my kind of long-winded way is to say we are not quite ready, but we should be, because we have no choice, because that's literally where the world is going. We have moved to the digital place, but there is a lot more that we can do in order to make sure that the South African and African tourism ecosystem is more empowered to be able to make use of the existing digital tools in order to drive the kind of economic activity that we want to see.
Right, yeah. And I think we were privileged to spend some time with the minister yesterday, and you know, we spoke about destination travel where people want to spend more time. You know, with increase in connectivity, people don't have to just go on holiday for a week or a long weekend. You know, you can now go and work from somewhere for 3 months or travel around. And it's one of the things I think that we are seeing, is that, you know, it's one of the top things that people are asking for, is about the actual connectivity and the quality of the internet. But before we even get to that, Deepesh, I'm going to ask you, just like at the most basic level, how does Uber then enable like the tourist experience from the very start?
Yeah, thank you. I think, as mentioned, most tourism journeys start online. So parts we didn't mention are like applying for visas, and that filters all the way through to booking accommodation, making payments, finding destinations. But what we see from an Uber perspective is, firstly, just in South Africa alone, we see tourists from over 160 countries visiting South Africa, and 10 million trips done by tourists annually, specifically in South Africa only. In other markets, like in Saudi, we see similar kind of numbers. And globally, what we've got is almost like a seamless network of tourist inflows between countries. But the most important thing from an Uber perspective is Uber is often the first kind of interface that tourists have once they land in a country. So the 40-odd thousand drivers that we employ across the country are the ones who transport tourists from the airport to their destination or to their accommodation. And it's often the point where they get a lot of interaction with the tourists themselves. So cultural nuances around the city, talking about the experiences, safety, advice on where to visit, etc. So Uber plays a big role in that specifically. And I think it's really important that we continue that kind of discussion around inclusivity. So I think Minister mentioned earlier that tourism is not only for the international market, it's also for the domestic market. And Wilme spoke about this as well. And, what mobility is a core function of that is essentially allowing accessibility to tourism, not just from the international market. So what we're seeing in South Africa is a rise of mobility from underserved areas into urban areas, promoting more tourism in those areas as well. And I was proud to launch an Uber Assist product a couple of weeks ago, where the product is catered for the disabled community. And one of the stories, and I think we're often privileged to not understand this, but it's very difficult for a disabled individual to get around previously without Uber. So if you think about it, they had to rely on someone to take them around. So a product like this that caters specifically for the disabled community allows people to get around just by the click of a button on mobility, on Uber. Secondly, I think inclusion goes more into the underserved communities as well. So we launched a product called Uber Moto a couple of months ago, and this is around alleviating transportation poverty, especially in the rural areas, and getting them into urban areas. And we think that push is going to help, just from a domestic tourism perspective, to get more people into these tourist sites.
Thanks for that, and congratulations on that. That is, we're all about inclusivity, and it's so important that we give everybody the opportunity to experience beautiful places. And as technology and artificial intelligence improve, we're seeing more opportunities for visually impaired people to understand and know where they're going through technology that guides them, the deaf, hearing impaired, having the ability to equally participate in tourism where previously they might have been fearful and felt marginalized. Wilme, so speaking about that and the growth in the tourism sector, how, in your opinion, or from a Airbnb point of view, how is growth showing up beyond these traditional tourism centers?
Yeah, so as mentioned before, domestic growth has been really interesting to watch, as I mentioned earlier. What we're seeing is that growth is no longer just showing up in those traditional tourist hotspots. Tourism dispersal is real, and it's happening fast. In recent data, we've seen 7 out of our fastest growing destinations has actually been in areas that are not typical tourist hotspots, areas like Mafube in the Free State, Mafikeng in the Northwest. So what's really exciting about that, it means that communities that wouldn't have typically benefited before are benefiting now. And what we see on Airbnb specifically is, on average, people spend about 3,000 Rand a day on products other than accommodation. And that spend, the majority of that spend, is hyper-local, meaning that money is going back into the economy. And then if I bring it back to Gen Z, we're specifically seeing it within that group, because they're the ones visiting those lesser-known destinations, going off the beaten track, seeking out those local experiences. And as such, they're actually drivers of natural tourism dispersal.
And of course, there's a huge opportunity in, outside of just, the accommodation, to start offering, other experiences related to those communities.
Exactly, and I think this is where a platform like Airbnb is pretty great as well, because we realized many years back that people don't just want to stay in a place, they also just potentially want to visit a place and see the place. So we launched a product called Airbnb Experiences and most recently Airbnb Services. And that's really leveled the playing field, right? Because not everyone has access to a home or an asset that they can share, but many people have a passion for hospitality that they want to share with the world. And as such, you can become an experience host on Airbnb. And in fact, we actually have one of our top experience hosts in the room, Bunsu from Kailicha, and also Zamani, who's a host from rural KwaZulu-Natal. So they're better place to speak about this than me.
Oh, wonderful. Congratulations, Guy. And of course, this opens, but Gwen, it's all dependent on, access to the financial economy, and being part of that. And what does it take then for small business and local business to benefit directly from this visitor spending?
I mean, I think it's primarily really around financial inclusion. And
Right.
I think financial inclusion is such a powerful driver for the visitor experience on one hand, and on the other hand, also for SMEs to be able to increase spend and also to gain access to finance. So by helping, by moving over to essentially digital payments, it supports them in being able to create that kind of financial profile that supports access to finance. And I think in a country like South Africa, we have a highly banked population. And so a lot of people have at least that first initial step of access to digital payments. But the problem is often usage. So we're still a society that transacts quite heavily in cash. And I think tourism is particularly one of those areas that, we identify as cash pools. So in other words, segments or areas of transaction flows which are still heavily cash-based. And so there's a lot of opportunity in tourism to support SMEs through digitizing payments. And by doing this, and we've seen through our own internal research as well that a lot more spend, in other words, tourists spend a lot more, whether domestic or international, when they're able to transact digitally. Whereas if they're transacting in cash, they tend to spend less. So if, as a destination and as a SME, one is interested in the question of how do we increase tourist spend, digitizing payments is a huge part of that solution and that equation. And of course, we know that there are challenges with regards to digitizing, payments. Some of those related to cost, but I think the cost conversation with merchants is also an interesting one to have because we find that often the cost of cash are not internalized. So yes, transacting digitally does carry costs because most service providers will need to be compensated for the value of processing that transaction, whether you're talking mobile money or card, etc. And often those digital channels are then compared to cash. So I think that sometimes is the trade-off. Is like, if I exchange, deal in cash, if I charge 100 Rand, I get 100 Rand in cash. But if I process, digitally, that might be that, 0.0, whatever, there might be those percentage points that are then go through processing the transaction digitally. But I think that conversation around really internalizing the costs of cash are really important because especially in South Africa, we know that there's a high risk of crime related to transacting in cash, which is not often priced in. So most people don't make the calculation that if I have a cash till in my business, I might have to have enhanced security measures precisely because I'm dealing in cash. Whereas if my payments were digital and there was no cash on premises, our expenditure on physical security, etc., might be different. So cash definitely is not free. There are costs related to cash, but we do also need to work on making the value proposition for digital payments a lot more attractive for SMEs and really helping to articulate it to them. But it's really important.
And it's also about digital maturity. People need to learn about the platforms, start trusting the platforms and understanding the broader benefits as opposed to just having the cash under your mattress. Type thing. But Deepesh, I wanted to ask you, if we talk about inclusivity, what role do you see mobility play in opening up access for new players? And then, of course, to more destinations, because what Wilme is saying, naturally we want to increase that.
Yeah, thanks. So I think I've spoken about a couple of the ones around transportation inclusion, around inclusion of the disabled community. I think what's also important is we are actually live across 21 cities in South Africa. And just like we've mentioned, there's a lot more traffic towards these underserved areas. So it's really important to kind of open up these gems in other parts of the country. But that comes with investment. It comes with participation in the economy. It comes with access to vehicles and financing and things of the sort. I also want to speak about a specific project we're doing on the Uber Eats side in Gauteng. Specifically, we were working on township inclusion. And we worked with the government of Gauteng essentially to onboard and digitize rural economy merchants. So these are your informal spaza shops and things of the sort, to bring them onto the platform. And we see that over and above mobility, Eats is also a key interface into tourism. And now all of a sudden we're pushing the demand through into these underserved areas that previously just had no digital presence to do so. And we've seen that over 1,000 merchants have been onboarded, tens of thousands of drivers have been onboarded, and this is just one part of Gauteng, and I think we can expand that even more so. The second part I want to speak about is a product we launched last year, specifically in Cape Town, called Uber Safari. And I think it brought South Africa on the map, specifically from a tech perspective. But we launched a product that essentially allows tourists to come through and book an experience on Uber, which takes them through to a safari for a full day kind of guided safari. And that was quite successful. We're replicating that in Kenya now as well. And it just brings more kind of focus into South Africa as a destination. Thirdly, I want to mention that often, and this is very anecdotal, but I'll mention this, tourists often interface to buy gifts and items and things on a grocery perspective. And often what happens is we forget things at home, and we need to have things that we need to buy, or we need to buy gifts for people we go back home to. And this morning, I flew in last night, I realized I didn't pack my socks, and I didn't pack my hair gel, and I was in a bit of a panic because I'm busy.
You can see your hair.
Exactly, my hair is not normally like this.
You didn't sleep it like that, eh?
No, exactly. This is not the same gel I use every day. So, but anyways, the point is,
Was it not available on Uber Eats?
not the one I use, unfortunately. This is the one I got on Uber Eats. But yeah. But anyways, within 10 minutes, I was able to get a pair of socks and some gel to my hotel room and delivered. And that's just fundamentally shifting participation in types of services that are offered. And this wasn't your typical Pick and Pay or Woolies stores. This was a corner store that's now digitized their business and offering their services on the platform. So I think as we think about the different kinds of services that can be offered digitally, it's not just, it's experiences, it's accommodation, it's search, it's payments, but it's all these day-to-day items that can actually be facilitated via digital platforms. And that's how I believe we'll start expanding into these underserved areas.
It's like I always talk about the digital economy as sort of like it's the silent engine of the economy, that drives the economy forward. And if we haven't got time to do that today, but if we look at what Airbnb is doing for the rejuvenation of rural towns and how important that is in the broader urbanization conversations. Our cities are buckling under the pressure, but if we can develop our rural communities, we can retain people. I think of Italy that had quite a big drive a couple of years ago and made funding available to deploy high-speed broadband to all the small towns to entice the young people to move back to smaller towns, to work from smaller towns, because they wanted to take the pressure off, some of the larger cities. We see mass investment right now. There's a huge race globally of countries trying to make connectivity available. The US has announced a $54 billion BEAD funding to make sure that all rural communities, rural towns are, can apply to this funding mechanism to deploy infrastructure for all of these things that it enables. And Sipho, I want to ask you this because I know that Google is incredibly passionate about taking people on this inclusion journey, making sure that everybody's got equal access to the internet, that we include marginalized communities, and it's a conversation that I often have, with Google around the advocacy work that you do for that, and for governments to start understanding the real economic benefits of digital inclusion. What if we don't get it right? What's that risk to us?
Sure. I think, as you've correctly said, we're currently experiencing quite a big digital divide and a big digital gap. And unfortunately, that's often either on the lines of economic access. In a country like South Africa, again, might be divided in terms of geographic access as well. And with technology developing now, especially as we're moving further and further into the AI revolution now, there's a risk that we might extend that divide because access to AI is also going to be something that's going to define whether you have got it or you don't, right? We can't afford to have that gap grow any further. As you say, it's often the most vulnerable that will suffer because of that kind of divide. If we think about access that women, vulnerable communities would have, women or people in rural communities, for instance, if we are leaving them behind, we are kind of creating a two-tier system now, again, where there will be people who are able to engage and transact in the digital world, and kind of that's where money is. But now you've created another tier where it remains in a rural space where they don't have access to digital tools, they don't have access to AI tools, etc. So we really can't afford to have that. But it's in order to kind of mitigate those kinds of possible things happening. I mean, this is again where you come into, yes, infrastructure. Infrastructure investment is quite important. At Google, we've made investments ourselves because we again think like what Minister said. It's not just a government thing or it's not a private sector thing, but it's a partnership thing, right? So you would think about why Google is investing in infrastructure for connectivity. We've launched an Equiano subsea cable just 2 years ago. This year we're working on one coming from Kenya, connecting us to Australia, called Umoja. Again, because we understand that connectivity and infrastructure is quite a key part of making sure that the accessibility to such tools and platforms for everyone is what we need to actually have inclusive growth for everyone, especially in an economy like South Africa's. But beyond the infrastructure itself, I think one key element as well is the human factor, right? People. You do need the people. It is the people that are going to make the infrastructure then work and make it use it to get into the economic aspects that you want. So skilling of SMBs is quite an important thing that we do and invest quite a lot in at Google. We've got programs like what we refer to as our Google Hustle Academy, which is a boot camp for SMBs and SMMEs to be able to learn how to use emerging technology like AI in their business, right? So how do I use AI to in my digital marketing as a small business? How do I use AI to help me in my processes so that I have more time to focus on the business rather than focusing on the admin, right? And we know, especially with a lot of SMBs, these are maybe 1-2 person entrepreneurs who don't have time to be sitting down, capturing data and doing all of these things. They need to find ways to be actually doing the tours. They need to be finding a way to be actually serving their customers. So teaching them how to use the tools and making them accessible to them is some of the ways that we think is the best to address the divide, because that kind of divide, it was going to put us in a situation where we are creating a community of have-nots, because they can't access technology,
right.
Whether via infrastructure, because they don't have the skills, or because they don't have the tools and the platforms to use them.
Yeah, and of course that's going to increase the inequality as well. We saw that in COVID. I mean, in COVID we were all sent home. Those that had access to connectivity could continue work, and those there were 5.5 million children in South Africa alone that went home, that had no access to the internet, that could not continue studying. And I just want to make a mention of Equiano. This just for those of you that it's very interesting. The Equiano cable, in one cable, 144 terabits a second, is the combined capacity of 5 cables, submarine cables, that came before it in a single cable. And that's only because of the efficiencies that we are seeing in fiber optic submarine cables that connect our continent on the ocean bed Did anybody notice last weekend your internet was really erratic? It was a cable break. It's on the seabed, in the Red Sea. So everybody was like, oh, what's happening? Mother buffer, what is that thing that we talk about? Closing comment, Deepesh, everybody, quick, 30 seconds. I'm very scared of Anita.
Sure, luckily I talk fast. I think the overarching theme today for me is public-private participation, and I think Uber as an organization, as I've mentioned, has a global presence, has a big presence in South Africa. We're very bullish about investment into South Africa, specifically in the tourism sector, but we need participation from the government. We need certainty around licensing. We need regulatory certainty, and I think we need to have a collaboration between the private sector as well to ensure that we push tourism, accessibility, inclusivity, all of that forward. So I think we spoke about some of these challenges with the minister yesterday, and I hope we can continue jointly to fix some of these barriers that we've got currently.
I think from my side, my parting words would be, let's embrace the technology. It is here. I think the idea that we can walk away from it and be able to thrive in the global tourist competitive landscape is not going to work. So we need to find ways, and let's set the rules together. Let's sit down, government and private sector, and discuss, for instance, AI is coming in. How do we get the best out of it and then mitigating the risks that may come? Right. Because again, there are risks. So that requires a conversation. I think we've offered ourselves to minister and said, hey, let's sit around the table. Let's talk about how we can kind of chart a map out for what South Africa and Africa's tourist economy needs to look like.
AI for Africa by Africans.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Gwen?
I suppose in closing, I would say that, the first card in South Africa was issued in 1975, and it was powered by Mastercard. So effectively, we've been part of digitizing South Africa for 50 years now. And I think we're, excited to be part of, the next 50 years of driving digitization in the country. I mentioned earlier and I probably won't stop talking about it because it's so exciting, but I spoke earlier about how, from 2026, we'll be, partnering with McLaren in the McLaren Mastercard Formula One team. And I suppose I'd say I'm looking forward to how that can drive SA tourism.
Yeah, McLaren fans?
Yeah. Formula One, but maybe not McLaren. I'll zoom out. I think I'll leave it with, I think there needs to be a recognition of how important platforms are if we're to meet some of our very ambitious growth objectives in South Africa. And I think if government and platforms work together to scale the things that are working, not just to try and tackle the things that are not, we really can make tourism an engine for inclusive growth.
Right, yeah. Colleagues, I think my parting shot would be disrupt or be disrupted. This wave is taking the world. We're either going to go with this wave or we're going to drown under this wave. But it's happening globally, and we have to make sure that Africa is going on this journey. I want to thank all of you for your time. I want to thank you for your sponsorship, for making this event a possibility. Minister, I want to thank you specifically for allowing us to come on this journey with you, to bring the digital voice. And we look forward to working with you on digital for tourism in the coming years. Thank you, colleagues. Have a good afternoon.